No one was joking in Spokane, Washington on April Fool's Day, 1996. First, a bomb went off outside the office of a local newspaper, then another inside a bank. Two armed men entered and robbed the bank of $50,000. It was apparently the work of well-trained criminals. But one of the bombers made a crucial mistake. A simple pair of jeans he was wearing that day would later reveal his identity. Nestled at the falls of the Spokane River, the city of Spokane, Washington is the cultural and economic center of an area known as the Inland Northwest, which includes parts of Washington, Idaho, Montana, and Oregon. The region is known for its beautiful countryside and for being home to many right-wing groups openly hostile to the government of the United States. At 2:36 on the afternoon of April 1st, 1996, one of these groups made its presence known in Spokane. An employee at a branch office of the local newspaper, the Spokesman Review, noticed a bomb with a lighted fuse just outside the building's rear door. As he ran inside to call police, the bomb exploded, shredding doors, shattering windows, and filling the building with smoke. As employees fled the building, police rushed to the scene. They found extensive damage, but no one was injured. At 2:47, just 11 minutes after the Spokesman Review bombing, police got another call. There had been another explosion, this time inside a U.S. bank branch only 30 blocks away. Bank surveillance cameras showed two men entering the bank. Witnesses said a third man waited outside in a getaway van. The men inside the bank wore parkas and ski masks to hide their identities. They were heavily armed. At gunpoint, they ordered tellers to put money in bags.
After that occurred, and they got apparently the money that they believed was available, one of the robbers left a pipe bomb on the counter of the bank and lit it, and then told everybody to evacuate the bank. I think the comment was made by one of the witnesses that they said, "Get out, it's going to blow," or something similar to that.
The bomb, seen in this surveillance shot, exploded. It tore through the building, shattering windows, counters, and doors. Again, amazingly, no one was hurt.
If the teller had been standing there, she could have been killed or severely injured. And people inside the bank could have been severely injured from the shrapnel as it flew.
Investigators were now connecting the two bombings. Since the blasts came so close together, police were convinced the first bomb was a diversion designed to draw attention away from the bank robbery. It was clearly a well-planned and well-executed crime.
These people really knew what they were doing. And also, there was no question when they went inside that bank, these were not amateurs. They had planned this.
Letters left behind at both bombings left no doubt that they were related. The letters, which promised more violence, had a symbol at the bottom, a combination of the letter P and a cross. It was the symbol of the Phineas priesthood, a highly armed, extremely violent right-wing terrorist group that had declared a holy war against the United States government. Two bombings on the same day in Spokane, Washington left massive damage and a community that feared there would be more violence to come. As bomb experts dug through the rubble, they found letters the bombers had purposely left behind. To experts on domestic terrorism, the letters spoke volumes. They contained symbols that identified the bombers as members of the Phineas priesthood. The priesthood's creed is an unusual combination of biblical prophecy and violence, a radical right-wing view of America combined with a strictly conservative interpretation of Scripture. The result, a fanatical hatred of government and a rationale for violence.
They want to destroy America to say that they don't believe in reforming America. They believe that the whole system is rotten and needs to be basically torn down so that we can start over again.
David Nywert studied the Phineas priesthood for his book, In God's Country. He says the group takes its name from an Old Testament story about a man named Phineas, who kills an interracial couple.
The essence of the Phineas priesthood is that people who violate God's laws deserve to be killed.
News that the priesthood had targeted Spokane terrified the city and had everyone, including law enforcement, preparing for the worst.
This was the most serious crime probably that's ever happened in Spokane, from a danger to the entire community. Obviously, you have serial murders and a lot of murder cases and so on, but this case had, people in fear. They were terrorized.
Police now knew the name of the group, but not the names of the bombers. FBI analysts went over images from the bank's surveillance cameras. The images were shot once every second, making for a disconnected sequence. But when frozen and enlarged, the individual images were extraordinarily clear.
These pictures were some of the best that I've ever seen in the laboratory because they were high-quality 35mm black and white photographs. And the individual in question was standing so close to the camera that he filled a large part of the frame.
Vorder Brugge, an FBI photograph analyst, attempted to measure the bomber's height. He used a process known as perspective analysis, in which the tiles on the bank's floor, the position of the surveillance camera, and the height of the teller counters were all used to measure the dimensions of everything in the image. Analysts concluded the robber was approximately 5 feet 6.5 inches tall. This information was relayed to officers in Spokane. But then, on July 12th, just 3 months after the first attack, there was another bombing. This time, the target was this Planned Parenthood clinic. Witnesses said they saw 2 men in ponchos throw a lighted pipe bomb in the clinic's front door before driving away.
This particular one was covered with buckshot to produce more shrapnel, apparently in an effort to make it even more deadly or devastating than it would normally have been.
The bomb tore through the clinic and was clearly designed to kill. Only luck kept it from claiming lives.
Nobody was hurt. It was unbelievable. There was nobody there. Had they been, they would have been hurt. People inside the Planned Parenthood, there's no question somebody would have been killed, because this bomb blew a hole in a 4-inch concrete floor.
Then, just 15 minutes later, the same U.S. bank branch office robbed on April Fool's Day was hit again, almost a carbon copy of the first robbery and bombing.
After the bomb went off at the Planned Parenthood, van pulls up again at the same U.S. bank on Sprague Avenue. 2 robbers go in. One's carrying a 25-pound propane tank, the kind that we use for our barbecues, with something on top. They're both armed.
As in the first robbery, the men took over the bank and made off with $35,000 in cash. They left the propane tank bomb on the floor and fled in a white van. But this bomb, which was rigged with an electric taser detonating device, failed to go off. A matchbook left behind at the Planned Parenthood bombing contained the priesthood logo. It cited 2 biblical passages. One, Psalm 139, contains the verse, "Kill the wicked." A few days later, the bombers sent this letter to Planned Parenthood. It said, "Sorry we missed you on July 12th. We'll do better next time." After their branch office in Spokane, Washington was targeted in 2 separate bomb attacks, U.S. bank officials put up a $130,000 reward for any information on members of the Phineas priesthood, the group that claimed responsibility for the attacks. Meanwhile, analysts examined the pipe bomb that nearly destroyed Spokane's Planned Parenthood clinic.
That bomb caused unbelievable damage to the Planned Parenthood. The director of Planned Parenthood from New York came out and said this was the worst bombing that had ever happened of a Planned Parenthood clinic.
The bomb was wrapped with buckshot. This made it more deadly, but also more identifiable. Most buckshot is made from recycled car batteries, which makes for a lot of impurities, all of which can be identified. FBI analyst Kathleen Lundy took shavings from the buckshot found at the bomb site. These shavings are dissolved in a neutral chemical solution. This solution is then vaporized at extremely high temperatures. The rate of vaporization is then fed to a computer, which identifies the buckshot's basic chemical components.
Compared to my years of experience, the buckshot in this case had extremely high levels of these impurities, and the chemical or elemental makeup of this buckshot was, I'd say, distinctive compared to others that I've analyzed.
If this buckshot could be traced, investigators might get a lead on the bombers' identities. But then, a solid lead came from informants anxious to receive the reward.
One of the people that the Phineas priests, or that this gang of people had tried to recruit into their gang, decided that he wanted that money and contacted authorities and pointed out the men to them.
The informant identified 3 men, Vern J. Morrell, Robert Berry, and Charles Barbie, all living in Sandpoint, Idaho. The informant had one more piece of information. The trio was planning their next bank hit for October 8th. The target, a U.S. bank branch in Portland, Oregon. The FBI immediately began background checks and surveillance on the 3 men. They found that Morrell, 51, trained as a nuclear engineer, left his career and moved to Idaho to devote all his time to the Phineas priesthood. Barry, 42, owned a struggling truck repair shop and spent most of his time and money on anti-government activities. Barbie, 44, had quit his job at AT&T years earlier. Investigators suspected he might be the bomber in this surveillance image. Records indicated Barbie was 5 feet 6 5/8 tall, fractions away from analysts' estimate of the bomber's actual height. On October 8th, the men who were being watched by investigators using long-distance surveillance equipment loaded their vehicle with automatic rifles and grenade launchers and left for Portland. Before the trio arrived in Portland, FBI officials called the U.S. bank branch and told them to lock their doors.
What's going on?
Agents watched as the trio waited outside the bank in their van.
They saw people going up to the doors, shaking the doors. but nobody was getting in. So the bank got a phone call that said, "Are you open?" And they said no. We assume it was from a cell phone inside the vehicle.
Stymied in their plans, the men drove away. Agents followed them in the air and on the ground. And when the men stopped for gas in Yakima, Washington, police swooped in for the arrest.
They would have been prepared for anything. Had we tried to stop them on the highway and they were going to have a shootout, somebody would have died. There's no doubt in my mind.
Agents searched the suspects' homes. In Vern Morell's home, they found a Hewlett-Packard inkjet color printer, consistent with the one that printed the letter sent to the Planned Parenthood clinic. In Robert Berry's truck repair business, they found what appeared to be the same buckshot used in the Planned Parenthood bombing. And in the home of the third suspect, Charles Barbie, investigators found something that the FBI analyst told them to be on the lookout for. An unusual piece of evidence. A deeply worn pair of blue jeans. After the arrest of 3 men in the Spokane bombings and robberies, investigators looked for conclusive evidence to tie them to the crimes. The buckshot found in Robert Berry's truck repair business was subjected to the same analysis as buckshot attached to the bomb that destroyed Spokane's Planned Parenthood clinic.
Chemically, I couldn't tell the buckshot recovered from the bombing apart from the buckshot recovered from the business. They were chemically the same.
But prosecutors wanted something even more conclusive. Was there a way to use the bank surveillance images to clearly identify at least one of the robbers? Was it possible that these 2 images, which were particularly clear, were the suspect Charles Barbie? The robber was covered head to toe, but his blue jeans were clearly identifiable. Almost all blue jeans are made of white cotton that is then dyed blue. How that blue dye wears off, particularly on the seams, can be distinctive. A sort of hill and valley effect is created. High parts of the seam turn white, while the lower parts retain their color. The fit of the jeans and the posture of the person wearing them can create unique patterns, almost like a barcode that appears along these seams. FBI photograph analyst Richard Vorder-Brugge had an agent of Barbie's height wear the jeans taken from Charles Barbie's home. This man was photographed from the same distance and in the same position as the bank surveillance photo of the man thought to be Charles Barbie.
It enables me to get them positioned in a way that most closely approximates what the bank robber's posture was. It also enables me to try and replicate the draping of the clothing as closely as possible.
In a process called point-by-point analysis, the photos are broken down into sections, and each section is analyzed for distinctive features. Then, the 2 sets of photos, those showing the jeans worn by the bank robber and those taken from the suspect's home, are compared. The analysis showed more than 30 areas where the jeans were identical. Near the number 5, it is clear the actual seam of the jeans breaks and is folded over. This is clear in both sets of photos. At number 7, ridges can be seen extending above the hemline. But at the point where the seam meets the hemline, the jeans lose all their color and go completely white. This is also consistent in both photos. Finally, at the number 2, you can see wear lines shooting off to the left above the hemline. And at the hem, a sort of H pattern is created. It's an H with a broad right side and a thin left side. The same H pattern can be seen in jeans taken from Charles Barbie's home.
In this case, because I was able to positively identify those pants, I could get on the stand and say, those pants were the ones worn by the bank robber. I can't tell you who the bank robber was. And so it's very strong circumstantial evidence.
Barbie couldn't have known it, but the jeans he wore during the first bank robbery helped identify him and his fellow bombers. In March of 1997, the trio went on trial. Over 500 items were entered into evidence, but the proceedings resulted in a mistrial. It was later found that one of the jurors was sympathetic to the Phineas priesthood's anti-government beliefs. But at the second trial, 3 months later, the jury returned guilty verdicts, and Vern Morrell, Charles Barbie, and Robert Berry were given mandatory life terms. They claimed to the end that the trial was political, but investigators disagreed, and to prove it, they were able to present a well-worn pair of blue jeans. The same pair of blue jeans that were worn during the bank robbery.
I thought the FBI lab did an excellent job by being able to come up and compare those to the photograph and identify them positively as the jeans the bank robber wore. And that's the only time I ever know it to have been done. It may have done some other case someplace, but I'm not aware of it. That was pretty amazing.
They were basically robbers. They wanted the money. They're criminals. They didn't believe in our government, that's true. They didn't believe in abortion, and that's true. They didn't believe in banks, that's true. But they're common criminals. They did these to get money.
A small Canadian farm town made national news when a woman claimed she was raped by her own doctor. DNA tests proved the doctor was innocent. The victim insisted the DNA test was wrong. What does a high school graduate know that the world's top scientists do not? Nestled along Canada's beautiful southwestern prairie is the tiny town of Kipling, Saskatchewan. The population is so sparse, the farm animals outnumbered the residents. In a town this size, everyone knows one another.
It's a fairly quiet farming community with little crime. We may have up to 5 or 6 sexual assaults a year and break-and-enters, but fairly small in the scope of criminal code work.
This is the story of one of those alleged sexual assault cases. It took place on Halloween night in 1992. Depending on whose story you believe, it was either a night of lies and trickery or an unfortunate misunderstanding. A woman we'll call Candy was working at this gas station. Her boyfriend stopped by. They got into an argument.
I am not dealing with you anymore. I can't even stand to look at you.
Candy drove to see her girlfriend who worked at the Kipling Memorial Union Hospital. She wasn't there. Candy appeared upset. A nurse suggested she see a doctor. Dr. John Schneeberger was on call that night. He was also Candy's doctor and had even delivered her baby. Candy says Dr. Schneeberger recommended a sedative.
I wasn't really hysterical anymore, but what I told him was that I was so mad at Danny that I felt like killing him. But I didn't actually mean that I was gonna go out and kill him. I was just describing how angry I was. I had just expected that he would give me a couple pills or something, just to relax my muscles, calm me down.
Instead, Dr. Schneeberger gave Candy a shot. She says she went numb almost immediately.
Like I had no control over my muscles. It's like all my muscles left and I was just this piece of jelly falling over. I tried to scream. As I was falling over, nothing would come out except for like a croaking noise that a frog would make. It was so scary.
Candy isn't exactly sure what happened next, but believes she was raped.
When a dentist freezes your gums, you can't, and he's pulling your tooth out, you can't feel the pain from the tooth, but what you can feel is pressure of the tooth moving back and forth, and that's the only way I can describe it.
When she regained consciousness alone in the exam room, Candy had the presence of mind to place her underwear in an airtight bag. Candy was too dizzy to leave the hospital. The nurses insisted she spend the night. She said nothing of the alleged rape. The next day, she confronted Dr. Schneeberger.
I said, "The hell was that drug you gave me last night?" And he asked me, "Why? Did it give you wild dreams?" And then I knew that, oh my God, I was gonna have a hell of a fight on my hands, because here now he's already covering up, eh?
When Candy was released from the hospital, she spoke briefly with her parents and told them of her suspicions.
You could tell by the look on her face that something terrible had happened to her, eh?
Well, I was really hoping that wasn't true, eh? But when we saw her, we knew it was.
She then drove to Regina, a town 2 hours drive away, and went to a rape clinic for testing. There they found evidence of semen on her panties, jeans, and on a vaginal swab.
That was part of my reasoning for going for the rape kit, to find out if this really did happen, or am I going nuts? Did my mind play some tricks on me, or what the hell's going on here?
Blood tests also revealed an unusual drug in Candy's system, a drug called Versed.
They use it as a pre-anesthetic agent to induce anesthesia. You start to go numb and not feel the power of your muscles or able to use your muscles. And then you become very tired and then asleep.
When Candy formally accused Dr. Schneeberger of rape, many residents of Kipling believed Candy was lying. Dr. Schneeberger was a respected member of the community. He had never been accused of anything like this before. Some believed Candy, as a single mother, was either romantically interested in the married doctor, or her motive was to get some sort of financial settlement to end the controversy.
The town looked up to the doctor. He was a good doctor, and he would never do anything like that. It was impossible.
Also suspicious was the fact that Candy had said nothing to hospital nurses on the night of the alleged rape.
There were 2 nurses on shift that night. In fact, both of them were in that room, the room that the rape allegedly occurred in, very shortly after. They saw nothing amiss.
To end the controversy, Dr. Schneeberger willingly agreed to give blood for a DNA test. The DNA in the blood drawn from Dr. Schneeberger did not match the biological material from Candy's rape test kit.
And I was in shock again. And I said, no, that's impossible. That's impossible. How can this be?
7 more years would go by before that question was finally answered. When DNA tests showed that Dr. Schneeberger was innocent of the sexual assault on his 20-year-old patient, most people in Kipling tried to put the whole thing behind them. But Candy, the alleged victim, would not let the issue die. All during the next year, she insisted that someone, somehow, had tampered with the first DNA test at the hospital. So Dr. Schneeberger agreed to a second DNA test in August of 1993. His blood was drawn by a registered nurse. The test was monitored by the police, and the vials were taken directly to the forensic laboratory at police headquarters.
They watched the needle actually penetrate the doctor's arm.
Once again, Dr. Schneeberger's DNA did not match the DNA on Candy's clothing or the rape test kit.
Of course, I didn't believe them. A lot of other people did believe them. And I guess it's hard, you know, how you've got DNA is the new thing and it's supposed to be so right and so perfect.
We knew there was something wrong, that, like, we totally believed her, eh? And we knew he was up to something.
Dr. Schneeberger defended himself by saying the drug he injected into Candy that night in the hospital, Versed, can cause erotic hallucinations.
Versed can account for all sorts of hallucinations, possibly, but it can't produce semen. And according to the complainant, the last time she had had intercourse was weeks before this incident.
With no other evidence, in 1994, the police closed their investigation into this matter.
The doctor has already given 2 samples, and those 2 samples were tested, and they came up as being having a DNA profile, and the profile didn't match the semen that was left at the scene. So now we're stuck, where we really can't do anything.
The town of Kipling was not kind at all to Candy.
She hired a private investigator who broke into Dr. Schneeberger's car. On the headrest, he found strands of hair. But there were no roots attached, so they couldn't be used for DNA testing. Also in the car was a tube of lip balm, presumably used by Dr. Schneeberger. At her own expense, Candy asked a private lab to test the epithelial cells on the end of the lip balm. Those epithelial cells would contain enough DNA for testing. And when they did, Candy finally got her first piece of positive news. The DNA from the lip balm matched the DNA from Candy's rape test kit.
I knew it all along. It wasn't a shock that something was going to match, but it was a bit of relief, because at least we had that to prove to the police.
But there were 2 problems. First, there was no proof that the cells were Dr. Schneeberger's. Second, the evidence couldn't be used in court since the investigator broke into the car without a warrant. But if the cells on the lip balm were those of Dr. Schneeberger, why did the DNA from his lips differ from his blood sample? To find out, Candy filed a civil suit against Dr. Schneeberger and brought charges against him with the local medical society. At the hearing, Candy sat directly across from Dr. Schneeberger's wife.
If looks could kill, I would have been dead. Lisa was sitting across the table from me, and she just sat there with her arms crossed, just glaring at me like, "You little bitch, you are ruining our lives." And I just sat in my chair thinking, oh my God, you're so stupid, you know? You are so stupid, and if you don't watch it, it's gonna happen to your kids too.
All of this pressure prompted Dr. Schneeberger to agree to yet another DNA test. This time, the procedure was videotaped by police and performed at their forensics lab. The doctor appears friendly and helpful. The technician wants to take blood from his finger, but the doctor politely refuses, saying he has a disease that would cause his hands to bruise.
That's how we usually take the sample. We don't need much blood.
Since this is a voluntary test, the doctor can't be forced to do anything against his will. So the technician inserts a needle into his left arm instead. Nothing comes out.
The vein was larger, or appeared much larger than I would have expected. And I thought that was a little unusual.
She tries another tube, but still has trouble.
Sometimes the vacuum is poor in them and would not pull the blood out of the individual's arm.
Eventually, she was able to extract a sample. Afterwards, the nurse was puzzled.
It's a little strange in that, like the blood doesn't look kind of fresh, I don't know.
And the lab determined that the sample was too degraded for DNA testing. Police broke the news to Candy.
And I'm like, oh my God, whatever, like, that's bullshit. This is our last chance to get blood from him, and you guys screwed up again.
Even the police were suspicious when DNA from Dr. Schneeberger's lip balm matched the DNA from Candy's rape test kit. But since Dr. Schneeberger had passed 2 prior blood DNA tests, officials were hesitant to charge him.
Because of his submitting voluntarily to a DNA sample, it gave him the out that it wasn't me. There's a DNA sample showing it is not.
The only person who had an opportunity, limited as it was her doctor. But we believed in the DNA testing. I mean, we believed in the science of DNA.
They had to follow the rules of the Canadian justice system. I call it the Canadian criminal system, because that's basically what it is. It's the criminals that have all the rights.
On April 25th, 1997, 5 years after the alleged rape, police got a break. Startling new information was discovered inside the doctor's own home. Schneeberger's stepdaughter, his wife's biological child, claimed that the doctor assaulted her too. For several years, the youngster says her stepfather had been coming into her room at night and giving her injections. His wife discovered a box full of condoms, needles, and drugs, including Versed, in the doctor's home office.
I blame myself. I still blame myself. I screamed, I bawled, I was pretty disgusted because all of these years, I mean, I'm fighting to get the truth out, but also to make sure that it didn't happen to anybody else.
Dr. John Schneeberger was arrested and ordered to undergo yet another DNA test. Again, the procedure was videotaped.
Also advise you that we have a warrant to obtain bodily substances for the purpose.
The doctor was withdrawn and silent. Police took several samples, hair, saliva, then blood. Taken from his finger, not his arm. And this time, a surprise. DNA from all 3 samples matched DNA found on Candy's vaginal swab.
Oh, that was wonderful. That was what I had wanted all along. I mean, I had even offered to go chop an arm off. I would have socked him one in the nose to get that blood, no problem.
It was quite a happy day because we knew we had him. That Candy was right and everybody else that didn't believe her was wrong.
But a big question remained unanswered. How did Dr. Schneeberger fool the previous blood DNA tests?
It was a puzzle how those samples had come to be different than the lanced finger. Even if we knew there was something different, there was no way that we could prove anything.
Especially since the nurses and police all witnessed the needle being inserted into Dr. Schneeberger's arm while the blood was drawn. On the stand, Dr. Schneeberger would reveal his secret. In November of 1999, Dr. John Schneeberger went on trial in Saskatchewan for the rape of his patient Candy and his own stepdaughter. On the witness stand, he said he surgically inserted a plastic tube under the skin into his left arm, filled with blood from one of his patients. This is why he insisted that the blood be drawn from his left arm rather than anywhere else. If you look closely at the videotape of that blood test, you'll see that the doctor is careful to pull his sleeve only so high so as not to reveal the incision where he inserted the tube. And for a brief moment, you can see the tube protruding from his arm. But by the time the third test was done, 5 years after the rape accusation, the blood in the tube was old and dark, which explains why the technician was suspicious. Dr. Schneeberger, however, denied raping Candy. He claims Candy broke into his home, stole a used condom, and used that biological sample to frame him. He said he used his patient's blood for the DNA test because he had no other way to defend himself.
When that came up at trial that he thought Candy broke into his house and stole samples or whatever, it was laughable. It was absolutely laughable that he had to grasp at straws like that. It was just laughable.
I was a bulldog on the stand. I kicked his lawyer's ass. And he's supposed to be the best lawyer in southern Saskatchewan, best defense lawyer. Well, I showed him who was boss.
You run across strong-willed individuals. Sometimes the strong-willed individuals are right and sometimes they're wrong. And this particular strong-willed person was right, and she was right all along, and she was determined to see that what happened to her didn't happen to anyone else.
This would be right up around the top as far as being the most bizarre, the most involved, and involving all the forensic evidence here of any case that I had.
Dr. Schneeberger was found guilty of sexually assaulting Candy as well as drugging her and obstructing justice. He was also convicted of sexually assaulting his stepdaughter and was sentenced to 6 years in prison.
I'm so proud of Candy. If it was me, I don't know if I could handle everything that she went through. It was just, the test came back negative and she had to fight, and it was just a constant battle.
While taping this interview, Candy received a telephone call in which she learned Dr. Schneeberger had been denied parole.
I won again! That's so exciting. He lost. He lost both of his chances to get out for day parole and full parole. Oh my God, isn't that great? Woohoo! Anyway, I was so worried that he was gonna get out and everybody was gonna fall for his lies and bullshit again, but they didn't. They didn't. They're smarter than the rest. Oh my God. Do you guys know how exciting this is for me? It's like celebration.
You have to remember that the DNA also led us off the path. So when I lecture on this particular case to younger police officers, I say to them, remember, the DNA does give you something, but it has to be supported with corroborative evidence.
It was very frustrating not being able to have all the answers, but it finally did come together after 7 years and 24 days.
on a sweltering Texas summer day in 1993. A work crew noticed something unusual off the side of the road. Under a thicket of thorn bushes was the nude, decapitated body of a young girl. Just 200 feet away was another body, a young white male. Residents of this small town wondered who would brutally kill two young people in this way, and what was the possible motive. Cut-off Road, a remote spot in Tellico, Texas, linked by a rickety wooden bridge over Smith Creek. This is the area where a road crew discovered the nude body of an adolescent girl. She had been shot, stabbed, decapitated, and her hands removed. She also had extensive wounds on her abdomen, thighs, and genital area. Under the bridge was another victim, a young white male fully clothed who had been shot twice in the head with a .22 caliber pistol. On a barbed wire fence, detectives found several long blonde hairs. In the boy's back pocket was a wallet with a library card.
The library card had the name, which stated James Brian King. And we thought that may be him, but we weren't sure at this point because it was not a photo ID type. It was just a card with a name on it.
The girl's identification was more difficult since there were no hands for fingerprints and with the decapitation, no opportunity for a dental comparison.
She looked like a young adolescent, teenage white girl. She also had amputations of both nipples and a number of other cuts, mostly on the front of her body. She had some very long cuts down the front of the abdomen with extrusion or evisceration of part of the intestines to the outside.
A rape test kit showed no signs of sexual assault. Homicide investigators visited the father of the boy, James King.
And we showed Mr. King the wallet that had been retrieved from the white male's body, and he opened it and looked at some of the photos and looked at the library card, and we could tell his eyes began to get watery. And he said, yeah, you know, I recognize the wallet. You know, this is the wallet I gave to him, my son.
Mr. King also said that the girl's body might be his stepdaughter, 13-year-old Christina Benjamin, but wasn't sure because of the condition of the body. Mr. King told police that a few nights earlier, Brian was sleeping outside in a hammock when a car sounded its horn out front. He saw Brian talking to someone in a tan car. Then Brian got in and left. The next day, the family discovered that Christina was missing too. Investigators compared the hair on Christina's hairbrush to several long blonde hairs found near the murder scene on the barbed wire fence.
Once the hairs from the barbed wire and the hairs from the strand that were found out at the crime scene location were submitted to the laboratory, I produced microscope slides, and I compared those hairs to the hairs from the hairbrush. And they were microscopically consistent with one another.
The family also provided police with an X-ray of Christina's recent foot injury. That X-ray matched an X-ray of the girl's foot taken at the autopsy.
The night they found her, or the day they found her, Donna called me up that night and said, "Mom, I need some help. She said, because he's dead, she's been murdered. And I couldn't believe it. And that's how we found out about it.
I could never imagine losing a child. And nobody, unless it's happened to you, nobody else can either. I can't imagine what my mom went through.
In the crime lab, Charles Lynch found a foreign blonde head hair on Brian King's pants, which did not belong to either Brian or Christina. Lynch also spotted a single fiber attached to Brian's sneaker. It was nearly invisible.
I looked at the fiber from the male victim's shoe using transmitted light microscopy. I'd seen those types of carpet fibers before, usually from Japanese vehicles, and this was a tan fiber, so that was my communication to the police, that it may be from a tan vehicle of Japanese make.
Investigators hoped that this single fiber would lead them to the automobile Brian King got into on his last night alive. The grisly murder of two local teenagers was a highly publicized case in the small Texas community where the bodies were found. The viciousness of the murders even shocked the pathologist in this case.
It's the worst case of mutilation that I've seen in my work here. I have seen other cases of mutilation and seen a lot of cases of what they call the crimes of passion or overkill, where someone's stabbed or shot multiple times. But this is the only case I've seen like this where someone had this much mutilation of the body, probably after death.
Psychological profilers say that killers like this usually have aberrant drives and appetites. The savage treatment of Christina was indicative of vengeance and extreme hatred and suggested that the killer knew the victim. Local prosecutors went to the FBI Behavioral Science Unit in Quantico, Virginia, to find out more about the mindset of this killer.
One of them said to me, after he looked at the photographs, he said, "This is not a sexual crime." And I was a little confused because obviously she was nude and never found her clothing. And he said, whoever committed this crime did not have sex with her.
One trait common among individuals who have committed similar crimes is a history of abusing animals. Neighbors told police that Brian and Christina were planning to go out with a boy named Jason on the night they disappeared. And there was an anonymous telephone call to the sheriff's office.
The caller supposedly told this dispatcher that we needed to be looking at a subject by the name of Jason Massey.
Jason Massey was a 20-year-old high school dropout, the son of an alcoholic and drug user who spent his time moving from one run-down tenement to another. Jason was a petty criminal with a history of stalking, harassment, theft, and, most surprisingly, a history of abuse to animals.
A couple of days before the discovery of the bodies, Ennis police had received a call of a calf had been mutilated behind McDonald's. On their arrival, they observed a tan car. They also found a bracelet on the ground with the name Jason on it. There was a figurehead ran from the scene who was later identified as Jason Eric Massey.
Massey's friends painted a bizarre portrait of the troubled young man.
This guy also told me about how Jason Massey liked to mutilate animals such as dogs, cats, cows, and that Jason would, every chance he get, he would kill a dog and cut his head off. He calls them his trophies. And I said, well, what does he do with these heads? He said, well, he keeps them in a metal cooler.
And police discovered evidence that Massey knew Brian and Christina casually.
Jason Massey made comments about Christina, about how he really liked her and he wanted to take her out.
While everything seemed to point to Massey, there was very little forensic evidence found at the crime scene.
No smoking gun, so to speak. The case had to be developed. We had 2 children. The bodies were horrific, the way they were found, particularly the girl. Much work needed to be done to develop it.
The great difficulty in the case all along was what happened. How did this boy get killed? How did the girl get killed? What was the sequence? What was she sexually assaulted? What was the motive? Why was it done? And that was completely missing from the crime scene.
Police brought Jason Massey in for questioning.
I said, Jason, I said, I want you to see something. And he looked at me, and I threw down some photos of the crime scene, which showed Christina Benjamin and Brian King. And I said, Jason, I said, I want you to look at her. I said, tell me one thing. I said, is she as pretty now in these photos as she was that night that you had her? And he looked down, and he looked at me, and the next thing I know, he's kind of bending over, and he's gagging real big time, And I knew I hit a soft spot in him, when he did that. I'll never forget that expression of him.
Despite the circumstantial evidence against Jason Massey, there was no proof. For that, investigators needed scientific evidence. Armed with a search warrant, police collected samples of Jason Massey's hair and also impounded his Subaru automobile. A piece of the tan carpet was removed for scientific analysis. Also inside were 3 stains on the seat, which tested positive for blood.
When we got into the trunk of Jason Massey's car, there was a single leaf with a blood stain on it, a roll of duct tape with apparent blood on it, and also a hammer that appeared to have blood on it.
There was no sign of the .22 caliber weapon used in the murders. However, police did find a cash register receipt for some .22 caliber ammunition, as well as a set of handcuffs and a hunting knife. Investigators received another phone tip, this one saying that Massey was seen washing his car inside and out at a local car wash. Police immediately searched the contents of the vacuum machine at that car wash. Inside, they found an appointment card from Massey's probation officer and a number of long blonde hairs.
Head hairs from the vehicle of Jason Massey and head hairs found at the car wash location were all microscopically similar to those of Christina Benjamin.
The blood found in Massey's car was tested for DNA, but it couldn't be compared to the bodies since they were too badly degraded for DNA analysis. Instead, scientists relied on reverse paternity genotyping. By analyzing the DNA profile of Brian and Christina's biological parents and comparing it to the DNA profile of the blood in Massey's car, scientists could see if there were similar genetic markers.
We were able to determine that yes, much more certainly that blood did come from Christina Benjamin.
Scientists also needed to know if the time of the deaths matched the time frame Jason Massey and his automobile were in the victim's neighborhood.
Our best evidence was a forensic entomologist that looking at the larva activity found on the bodies could come up with a pretty good idea of when they were killed in relation to each other and in relation to time in general.
Samples of the insect larvae from both bodies were sent to the prominent forensic entomologist, Dr. Neil Haskell. Haskell studied the larvae and attempted to cultivate live larvae from the same heat and humidity conditions that existed in Texas the week the bodies were found. By doing this, Dr. Haskell could approximate the time between when the flies laid their eggs on the bodies and the larvae developed to the stage in which they were found. Dr. Haskell determined that Christina and Brian died 2 days before their bodies were discovered. This coincided with the time frame that the tan automobile, similar to Massey's, was in front of Brian and Christina's home. Jason Massey was arrested and charged with capital murder. He pleaded not guilty.
Jason Massey was a handsome young man, and I was worried that if he took the stand and testified that he might sway some of the jurors.
Guilt or innocence would be determined by the forensic evidence.
No one of those sciences was able to show beyond a reasonable doubt that Massey committed the crime, but put all together, it meant that either Massey had committed the crime or he had to be the most unlucky person in the history of the world, because every piece of evidence pointed toward him.
Before the trial ended, prosecutors learned even more about Jason Massey. Information that would seal his fate. In 1994, Jason Massey went on trial in Texas for the murders of 14-year-old Brian King and 13-year-old Christina Benjamin. Prosecutors believe that both Brian and Christina got into Jason Massey's car around midnight on July 27th for a ride in the country. Prosecutors also believe Massey's plans included much more than just a ride. Massey stopped his car on the cut-off road bridge and shot Brian King twice in the head at point-blank range with a .22 caliber pistol. He then pushed him out of the car off the side of the bridge. Christina got out of the car and ran. Jason followed, shot her in the back, but the wound wasn't fatal. Later, he shot her in the head, then stabbed her. Prosecutors believe the mutilation occurred after death. Christina's head and hands have never been recovered. The motive was difficult for prosecutors to identify.
There was no traditional motive in this case, and instead, Massey was most likely what's referred to as a lust murderer. That is, a person that receives a certain degree of sexual gratification from the killing and mutilation of human beings.
Before the trial was over, a hunter walking in the woods made a gruesome discovery. He found a red cooler inside with the decapitated heads of 31 animals and also the journals of Jason Massey revealing his hideous deeds and horrific thoughts. These Slayer books of death, as Massey called them, were a frightening and incriminating insight into the mind of a killer, a mind obsessed with murder, sex, and mutilation of young girls. The jury found Jason Eric Massey guilty of the 2 murders. 2 young lives were avenged.
Mr. Massey, any comment on your guilty conviction?
No, ma'am, I'm just glad it's over.
For the penalty phase, prosecutors had just 24 hours to assemble the information contained in Jason Massey's journals to convince the court that the death penalty was appropriate.
He started out with killing 8 cows, 30 dogs, and 39 cats. And he cut off their heads and kept them as trophies.
Here's one where he's talking about a little girl, and he says that he loves her and he's decided to kill her, he just doesn't know when.
Prosecutors told the jury that Jason Massey's journal contained evidence that he had planned to kill again and again. Massey's writings revealed that his greatest aspiration in life was to become the most famous serial killer in America.
We wanted the jury to know just the kind of person that we were dealing with. And that person was one that was obviously going to be a predator of incredible proportions.
The jury deliberated just 15 minutes and decided upon the death penalty.
Well, the judge said, I sentence you to death by lethal injection, and the only injustice in this court today will be that 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 your death will be so much more humane than that of your victims. The judge said that. And everybody stood up and cheered for the judge.
Jason Massey was executed on April 3rd, 2001. Christina's grandparents witnessed his last moments alive.
This was Jason Eric Massey's final statement just prior to his execution. He said, "Yes, first I would like to speak to the victim's family. First of all, I would like to say that I do not know that any of y'all, and that's unfortunate because I'd like to apologize to each and every one of you individually. I can't imagine what I've taken from y'all, but I do want to apologize.
I apologize to you for what I did. I want you to know that it was only I who committed the murders. No one else was involved. Christina felt no pain. The things done to her occurred after her death. I swear, the things done to her occurred after her death, I swear. Her head and hands I threw into the Trinity River. I didn't rape or torture her either. I admit my guilt, and I ask your forgiveness. I pray you will forgive me. If not now, then in the future. May God be with you and keep you through this. His servant, Jason Eric Massey." I don't know how to describe it other than we watched him die. We had no emotions other than we were watching this person die. He kept mouthing, "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." We didn't believe him. No, there's no way that you could forgive this man for what he did.
It was quick, it was painless. He was lucky, you know. The way I look at it, my brother and my stepsister weren't so lucky. I mean, you know, they died horrible deaths.
I'm not the one that was going to have to judge him. And I can't judge him, but I can never forgive him.
Detectives were very good and efficient. They did their jobs well.
In 1981, a witness claimed she saw the brutal murder and cremation of a woman underneath a tree on a stretch of deserted farmland. But there was no trace of the remains anywhere nearby, and investigators were stumped. For answers, they turned to the science of forensic geology. Marshall, Illinois is a small farming community just across the Wabash River from Terre Haute, Indiana. The rich soil feeds vast fields of corn and acres of soybeans. The biggest landowners in town were the Grabby family. Fred and Charlotte Grabby were very prosperous. Both worked the farm with their daughter, son, and daughter-in-law.
The Grabbys had a lot going for them. I mean, they had substantial resources, inheritance on Charlotte Grabby's part, you know, and well into the six figures. So these were not poor, small dirt farmers.
Fred Grabby was easy to spot. At 6'4" tall and close to 300 pounds, he dwarfed his petite wife.
Well, when I first got into the family, I thought Fred was very nice, very polite. He was fun to be around. He really seemed to like me. They worked a lot. Charlotte worked from daylight to dusk.
The Grabby marriage had its ups and downs like all marriages, but this one had some unusual twists. Fred Grabby had an eye for younger women, and shortly after he married Charlotte, the couple divorced. Later, they reconciled and married again. But in 1981, Charlotte again asked for a divorce, and Fred moved out of the main house into a smaller cabin on the farm. The reason for the divorce this time was that Fred was having an affair with a pretty 24-year-old bartender, Vicki McAllister.
Not exactly the most successful person in that part of the world. She attended bar. Her reputation was not of the purest.
On July 24th, 1981, Charlotte Grabby left the house to cultivate soybeans on the farm. Her children expected her home by dinner time, but she never returned home. When her children couldn't find her, they contacted the local sheriff. Fred told the sheriff that he had spoken to Charlotte earlier that day near a storage shed on the Grabby's farm, and their conversation got heated.
They got into an argument. He left the machine shed. Charlotte pursued him in her car.
She got in her vehicle, drove off, and was last seen. The last saw her driving up the interstate. That was his story. Consistently over time, that's what he said.
In the shed, authorities found Charlotte's uneaten lunch on her tractor. Her purse was also in the shed, along with her migraine medication and driver's license. And the neighbors said she saw Charlotte's car drive by earlier in the day, but the driver did not appear to be Charlotte.
They saw Fred's pickup go by, and then they saw Charlotte's car right behind it with a blonde, curly-haired woman driving it. Charlotte Grabby has dark, short hair, straight hair.
A few days later, Charlotte Grabby's car was found across the Indiana state line outside a bar in Terre Haute. Police found no blood, no evidence of violence, but they did recover a fully loaded handgun under the seat. Investigators learned that Charlotte had written a letter shortly before she disappeared, and that letter contained a warning. Charlotte Grabby disappeared from this remote field on her Illinois farm. Just prior to her disappearance, she asked her children to make a promise.
If she wasn't home by 4:30 p.m., we were supposed to come and look for her.
The reason? She was afraid of the man she was trying to divorce, Fred Grabby.
My dad would have fits of rage for seemingly no reason at all, directed mainly toward my mother, but sometimes toward my brother or myself, more my brother than me, actually. One particular instance, I heard yelling, so I ran outside. My brother and my dad were fighting physically, and my dad even took my brother by the side of the head and beat his head into the fender of the pickup.
Just 10 days before she disappeared, Charlotte left several notes in a safe deposit box in the local bank. In the notes, Charlotte accused her husband of stealing some farm equipment and said she didn't think she would live through a divorce. She said she was afraid of Fred and also his friend and business associate, Dale Kessler. When police interviewed Dale Kessler, he said he was home on the night Charlotte disappeared and that Fred Grabby had been with him. When a grand jury asked Fred Grabby about his whereabouts on the day Charlotte disappeared, he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and refused to testify. With no evidence of a crime, the official investigation stalled. Charlotte Grabby became yet another missing person. Despite a $25,000 reward posted by the Grabby children, Charlotte's disappearance remained a mystery for the next 3 years.
It's all I thought about from the time I got up till the time I went to bed every night. How am I going to find my mom? She could be alive out there somewhere. Probably not, but she might be. And I had to go on that possibility, and I kept thinking, you know, if it were me, she would never give up.
With nowhere else to turn, in 1984, Charlotte's daughter hired a private detective, Charles Pearson. Pearson discovered that Fred Grabby had recently broken up with his longtime girlfriend, Vicki McAllister, and Pearson tracked her down in Indiana. Almost from the start, Vicki McAllister seemed anxious to talk about her life with Fred Grabby.
He was able to play on her emotions and to draw from her a horrible secret.
It was the secret to Charlotte Grabby's disappearance, and the story was so horrific, it was difficult to believe. Vicki claimed that she went to the shed to borrow a steel drum from Fred to haul some trash. When they heard Charlotte drive up, Fred told Vicki to hide behind a tractor. Charlotte and Fred immediately began to argue and soon turned violent.
From what Vicki McAllister told us, Fred actually choked Charlotte several times and then would let up on the pressure and let her regain consciousness and then would choke her again, making comments to her the whole time.
Vicki said that after Grabby choked Charlotte to death, he sodomized her. Afterwards, he used a grease gun to fill every orifice of her body to make it more flammable. He then put her body in the trash barrel and headed towards the river. Vicki drove Charlotte's car and abandoned it over the state line in Indiana. Later that night, Fred doused the body in diesel fuel, and while Vicki watched, Fred burned the body. The fire lasted throughout the night. Eventually, only Charlotte's skull remained. Grabby threw it in the Wabash River, saying that it would make good fish food. He then rolled the barrel into the river.
The story, when you hear the whole thing, it's really kind of hard to believe.
McAllister's tale horrified Charlotte's daughter.
It was almost overwhelming. Of course, I cried a lot. And over the course of the next few days, it had to sink in because there just was so much to it, you know, and it was so horrific, as you say. I just kept praying that my mom didn't go through any pain.
McAllister had plenty of motive to tell a story that would put Fred Grabby in prison.
There's no greater wrath than that of a spurned woman. She may have originally been concerned with long-term relationship with him. It lasted for a certain period of time, and then it ended. And then I think she was angry.
Vicki came to expect, if not be told, that she would share in the dynasty, the financial dynasty of the Grabby family, that she would become a part of everything, and that she and Fred would live happily ever after. I mean, that's the story that guys tell girls, and girls often believe.
In exchange for her testimony, Vicki McAllister was offered total immunity, relocation, and a new identity. And if Grabby was convicted, McAllister could claim the $25,000 reward offered by the Grabby children.
Anytime you have just one person's word against another, it's always better to have some type of physical evidence.
But there was another living witness to the events of that terrible night 3 years earlier. And that evidence would tell if Vicki McAllister's story actually had the ring of truth. Fred Grabby's ex-girlfriend, Vicki McAllister, took police to the scene of the cremation, which she says took place on the banks of the Wabash River, just underneath this mature maple tree. But after 3 years, there were no remains found anywhere in the vicinity.
I was with one of the attorney generals that was assisting our state's attorney in the prosecution of the case. And I made a comment to him, just wondering if at this burn site, if there was any possibility that petroleum products from the diesel fuel that was used could still be recovered in the soil around this site.
Since the Wabash River frequently overflows in the area of the maple tree, any traces of the diesel fuel in the soil would have long been washed away.
We took some soil samples and they were negative for petroleum products.
But one piece of potential evidence survived: the maple tree under which the funeral pyre allegedly burned.
Trees make excellent history books because they show us when events occurred nearby the tree. They can explain to us exactly when different events happened.
In this photo, Sheriff Crumrin is standing on the spot the barrel was allegedly placed. Was there any way for science to corroborate Vicki McAllister's story? In the spring and summer, roots transport water and nutrients from the surrounding soil up through the trunk and into a tree's branches, where they fuel the growth of very large cells. When the tree goes dormant in late summer and fall, it produces smaller, more dense cells. This cycle produces the familiar rings we see when we cut a tree branch or trunk. Each ring indicates another year has passed. If the tree absorbed diesel fuel from the gruesome funeral pyre, was there any way to tell?
Diesel fuel is a toxic material to trees. It will either kill the cells or it will affect their growth rate, their metabolism adversely. When it's absorbed by the tree, it will slow the growth rate of the cells that it's in contact with.
Investigators cut 5 branches from the tree, and when they counted back through the growth rings, they saw something startling.
In 1981, the growth of those branches had dramatically slowed from what it had been in previous years.
Growth rings from the year Charlotte disappeared were much thinner than earlier rings, but there was no way of knowing why this was so. To find out, pieces of each branch were ground into sawdust and given to Dr. Donald Dickerson, an organic chemist. Dickerson dissolved the samples and injected the sample into a gas chromatograph. The results indicated the presence of hydrocarbons, compounds indicative of petroleum products. Even more startling, only 2 of the 5 branches showed traces of petroleum, the ones on the side of the tree where Vicki McAllister said the cremation took place.
Samples on the other side of the tree were negative for hydrocarbons.
Some species of trees will translocate or carry the material laterally around the tree better than others. Maple trees in general tend to maintain fairly direct columns between the roots and the branches above.
A unique forensic approach had uncovered evidence that matched Vicki McAllister's bizarre and horrifying story exactly.
Heck of a coincidence.
John O'Brien spent 40 years as a crime reporter for the Chicago Tribune.
In the boondocks of Marshall, Illinois, way down in Clark County, I don't think there's another crime that comes close to not only the murder of Charlotte Grabby and the means in which her body was disposed of.
But the story doesn't end here. Another mysterious fire, an attempted prison breakout, and the murder of one of the Grabby children were all to impact Fred Grabby's trial. When scientists discovered hydrocarbons in the maple tree next to where Charlotte Grabby's body was allegedly incinerated, Fred Grabby was arrested and charged with murder. The star witness was Fred Grabby's ex-girlfriend, Vicki McAllister, who was given immunity to testify. Her story both fascinated and horrified courtroom spectators.
The first time I think I heard about the tree was when it came out in court. And I thought, wow, you know, that really, to me, proves Vicki was telling the truth about everything.
The motive? Money. Fred Grabby had no desire to split the family assets with his wife, even though it was Charlotte's inheritance which comprised the bulk of their holdings.
Most of the farm ground that they had, it's my understanding, belonged to her through her side of the family, and Fred was going to lose a lot of money, basically. That's what it all amounted to.
If the love of money is the root of all evil, the roots of a maple tree soaking up errant diesel fuel sealed Fred Grabby's fate. Fred Grabby was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of his wife and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In a bizarre twist to a bizarre story, Fred Grabby's new girlfriend, Barbara Graham, armed with a gun, arrived at the jail one night and attempted to get him out of prison. She fired 5 shots, wounding one deputy in the leg.
He is able to get up on top of her, says, "Don't make me kill you." And at that time, the struggle ceased.
For that offense, Barbara Graham was sentenced to 16 years in prison. 2 months later, the home Fred and Charlotte shared and the house their children, Jeff and Cindy, had built next door burned to the ground. Arson investigators discovered both fires were deliberately set.
Oh, I believe Fred Grabby probably had some involvement with it. Not in setting the fires directly, but I believe he probably had some involvement. But we'll never know, probably.
Fred Grabby's lawyers appealed the first verdict and, on a technicality, won a new trial. A month before the second trial, Fred's son, Jeff Grabby, who had testified against his father at the first trial, was found murdered in California with 3 bullet wounds to the chest.
We were notified by Seal Beach, California authorities that they had found the body of Jeff Grabby floating in one of the harbors out there.
To this day, some believe Fred Grabby had a hand in his son's murder, although Fred denies it.
I don't know if he had that kind of pull with people he could send out to California. I don't think so, but there's a lot of things I don't know.
The second trial ended the same way as the first. Fred Grabby was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 75 years in prison.
I wrote him a letter telling him that I forgave him for what he did. I hate what he did, but I still love him because he's my dad, if that makes sense.
No one has ever been charged with Jeff Grabby's murder, and no trace of Charlotte Grabby's remains have ever been recovered. Vicki McAllister claimed her reward, then left the area, relocated at the state's expense. She continues to fear that Fred Grabby will somehow take revenge, even from behind prison bars. The maple tree still grows not far from the Wabash River.
The maple tree, alive and growing, was one thing, one creation that Fred Grabby could not intimidate, could not reach, could not destroy.
come by Bill Mowbray Motors on the expressway in Brownsville and prove it to yourself. We really do have great service and low prices.
When a Texas car dealer was found shot to death in his bed, it looked, at first, like suicide. But a closer examination of the evidence convinced investigators the man had been murdered in cold blood. A decade would pass, and a family would be ripped apart before a jury rendered final judgment on what really happened that hot Texas night. In the early morning of September 16, 1987, a couple in Brownsville, Texas watched late-night TV before going to bed. 43-year-old Bill Mowbray complained of having trouble with his back and told his wife, Susie, he was going to sleep. About a half hour later, she switched off the TV and turned in for the night. Soon afterward, the Mowbrays' lives would change forever. Susie said she heard a noise and woke up to see her husband's elbow pointing upward into the air. Seconds later, she heard a loud explosion. She leapt out of bed and found him bleeding profusely. A pistol lay near his hand. She said she pulled it away and dropped it. It landed in a pool of his blood. She rushed downstairs to call for help. Her first call was to one of her husband's co-workers. He did it, she told him. He shot himself.
My husband, after threatening suicide for at least 3 years, almost on a weekly basis, finally did it. And the worst thing that could ever happen to anyone happened to me.
After telling the co-worker what happened, Susie Mowbray then called 911. Homicide investigator George Gavito was one of the first people on the scene.
She was waiting there at the gate. She had a mixed drink in one hand and she had a cigarette in another hand. She went in, when the deputies came in, went back to the house. She pointed to the room upstairs where it was.
Paramedics and investigators found Bill Mowbray with blankets pulled up to his neck. He looked as if he were sleeping, except for the massive damage caused by the .357 Magnum that lay near his body.
The entrance wound was on the right side, the right temple, and the exit wound was on the left temple. Now, this was a very high-energy weapon. It was a very, very disruptive blast. It literally blew this victim's head apart.
The fatal wound was a contact wound. The gun barrel had been placed directly against Bill Mowbray's head. As the bullet exited his left temple, it went through his left hand, which was apparently resting under his head when the shot was fired.
This was either a homicide or a suicide. Either he shot himself with his right hand and had his left hand bracing his head. You know, that was a plausible theory at that point. Or somebody else shot him while he was lying or perhaps sleeping on his left hand.
Brownsville residents were shocked to learn that one of their most high-profile residents had apparently killed himself. Bill Mowbray ran a local Cadillac dealership and was well known in town. But the dealership had fallen on hard times. Bill was deeply in debt and was being investigated for alleged tax fraud.
He was fairly desperate. He had gone to a banker and put his head down on the desk and cried in front of that banker and said, if you don't loan me $200,000 to help me out, I'm going to kill myself. And he was desperate. He had gone to every source he knew for funds.
It looked as if Bill Mowbray had gone through with his threat. But investigators weren't so sure. They noticed something unusual in the position of his body. Something that said it was physically impossible for him to have shot himself. They were convinced that Bill Mowbray's death was not suicide, it was murder. At 39, Susie Mowbray was attractive, personable, and an asset to her husband Bill's business.
Bill Mowbray Motors, where you can buy your all-American classic.
The two, both coming off divorces, had met 9 years earlier and married soon afterward. They lived the good life, a beautiful home, exotic vacations, condos at the beach. For Bill Mowbray, money was no object.
My brother did have a tendency to spend a lot of money. He did like good things. When he would get involved in any kind of a hobby, he would get involved completely.
But Bill was having serious money problems. He was overextended on his business and in trouble with the IRS. He was also cheating on his wife.
People knew they were separating. Bill was going out with someone else, and Susie had found out about it too. She found a couple of glasses of champagne in the bed when she had come back and questioned the maid about it, and the maid had confirmed that Bill was going out with someone.
On the day before his death, Susie discovered that Bill had made changes to their insurance policies. She found that within days, the current policies would be canceled, and Bill's daughter would become the main beneficiary of new policies worth almost $2 million. For police, this signaled a possible motive for murder.
We got the 2-year suicide policies in Texas. If you buy an insurance policy, you have to wait 2 years before you commit suicide. If you just buy it and commit suicide, of course, it doesn't pay off. And if the new insurance policy, well, to begin with, she wasn't going to receive any money, so she had to make a move, and she had to make it quick.
Susie's actions just after Bill's death also aroused suspicions. Bill's brother Jim went to the house just hours after Bill's body had been removed.
I'd been told that he had killed himself in his bedroom, which was up a set of stairs. And as I got closer and closer, I started hearing music and people laughing and stuff up in the bedroom. And I was taken by that, and about that moment, Susie popped out in front of me. And my first words to her were, "What's going on?" And she said, "We're having a painting party." And I was dumbfounded.
Like having a party at this point is rather inappropriate, considering the
Everything had been taken out of the room. All the furniture, even the carpet, was gone. But for police, the unusual position of Bill Mowbray's body provided clear indications of foul play. When a high-powered gun is fired at close range into someone's head, it creates what is called blowback. Basically, the force of the blast blows brain and blood matter back onto the hand and arm of the shooter. Bill Mowbray would have had to shoot himself with his right hand, since his left hand clearly contained an exit wound. But his right hand was lying at his side and was virtually free of blood.
There was a very minimal amount of blood smeared about the right arm and hand, but no spatter. To me, this indicated that it was extremely unlikely that he could have been holding the gun when the shot was fired. At that point, then, I reached the conclusion that this individual could not have shot himself.
In addition, his right hand was under the covers. It seemed impossible that he could have fired a bullet into his head and then pulled the covers back over himself all the way up to his neck. What's more, blood analyst Sergeant Dusty Heskew said he found blood spatter and traces of lead on the nightgown Susie Mowbray was wearing when Bill died. All indications were that Bill Mowbray had not killed himself. And there was only one other person in the house the night of his death, his wife, Susie. And she had a $1.8 million motive to kill him. Prosecutor Bill Hagan theorizes that Susie could have laid next to Bill, and using the pillows and blankets as a barrier between them, fired at point-blank range into his head. He says that despite the barrier, blowback left blood spatter and lead vapors on her gown. These red dots show where Heskew claimed to have found blood. 4 months after Bill's death, Susie Mowbray went on trial.
You feel confident going into your trial now?
No. I don't think anyone in their right mind would say, I feel confident going into a trial like this. No, I'm scared.
After a 3-week trial, Susie Mowbray was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The jury agreeing that it was physically impossible for Bill Mowbray to have shot himself. But as she was sent away, her supporters said they found evidence that she was innocent. The question was whether they would ever get a chance to prove it. In June of 1988, Susie Mowbray was sent to prison to serve a life sentence for the murder of her husband, Bill. She maintained her innocence while attempting to adjust to life behind bars.
I can remember there was this moment of utter just terror after they had announced the verdict, and this female officer of some sort is escorting me over to the county jail. And first words out of my mouth, are they going to hurt me? And she said, not unless you give them a reason.
Her supporters, particularly Wade Burnett, her 20-year-old son from a previous marriage, went back to the evidence that was used to convict her, claiming crucial details were misrepresented. He found that prosecutors had not disclosed a report that contradicted their own case. It had been done by Herbert McDonald, a highly regarded blood spatter expert. He had examined the gown Susie Mowbray was wearing when she allegedly shot her husband.
The evidence I examined strongly suggested that that garment wasn't anywhere near Bill Mowbray when he was shot. And of course, that would assist the defense and not the prosecution.
McDonald was never called to testify. Instead, the prosecution's other blood analyst, Sergeant Dusty Heskew, testified that he found 48 separate blood spatters on Susie Mowbray's gown. This was a particularly damning piece of evidence. He said he used luminol to examine the gown. Luminol is a chemical that causes blood to glow or luminesce even after it has been cleaned. The effect only lasts for about 30 seconds. Time, Heskew said, to measure all the blood spatters. This is a claim dismissed by most blood spatter experts.
I don't doubt that he saw specks of glowing material in the dark, but according to his testimony, he saw many and he measured them. This is like measuring the length of a firefly at night in the springtime. That's a good trick. I wish I knew how to do that. I don't.
There were other problems. Blood is not the only substance that will glow when in contact with luminol. Certain bleaches, even something like horseradish, will also glow. No one doubts that Heskew saw something glowing on Susie Mowbray's nightgown, but no tests were ever performed to determine if what he saw was in fact blood.
The forensic evidence in the original trial pointed a particular way, and it turned out that all their testing and their forensics were all flawed and probably carelessly done. Everything was so directed towards a finding of guilt that I really feel like it wasn't a fair analysis of the forensic evidence.
When it was discovered that the nightgown had not been properly tested, the judge overturned the verdict, and after serving 9 years, Susie Mowbray was released from jail.
I am standing here with my family, not inside a prison. This is freedom.
But she would have to face a new trial, and prosecutors remained confident that the evidence used to convict her the first time would convict her once again.
She put a gun to Bill's head and she pulled the trigger, and she did it because her marriage was going bad, and she saw an opportunity to continue living the lifestyle she had and collecting some money.
But her defense attorney said it was clear Bill Mowbray killed himself, and that key evidence proving their case was gone. The T-shirt Bill was wearing when he was shot had been torn apart by paramedics trying to save him, and the blanket next to his body, which would have absorbed large amounts of blood spatter, had been lost shortly after his death. Susie Mowbray's retrial in January of 1998 was perhaps the biggest media event in the area's history. People lined up for hours to get a seat in court. Thousands more watched nationwide on Court TV. Finally, it appeared the courts would answer a question now almost a decade old. Had Bill Mowbray killed himself, or was he the victim of a cold-blooded killer? The main bone of contention in the retrial of Susie Mowbray centered on a simple issue. Bill Mowbray had been shot with a high-powered gun at point-blank range. Whoever shot him would have been spattered with blood. Yet, Bill Mowbray's right hand, the only hand he could have used to shoot himself, had no gunshot residue and was virtually free of blood. That left Susie Mowbray as the only other suspect. But a respected blood spatter expert, originally hired by the prosecution, said there was no blood on the gown she was wearing when her husband was shot.
I could see no staining whatsoever on it, but neither inside or outside. So I told him at the time, I said, I don't see how she could have been in close proximity to the exploding head, literally. Bill Mowbray had a lot of tissue, brain substance, dura, hair, skin that was blown all over the room.
Prosecutors claimed it was possible that Susie could have placed pillows and a blanket between herself and Bill, and that these received most of the blowback blood spatter. But that blanket and the T-shirt Bill Mowbray was wearing when he was shot had been lost, a serious blow to the prosecution. Meanwhile, Susie Mowbray's defense team had its own problems. They had to account for what many considered to be her unusual behavior just before and after the shooting. She found out just before Bill's death that she was being cut out of his life insurance policies. Then, after he was shot, she called a family friend before calling 911. And within 10 hours of his death, she was painting the room where the shooting took place.
They were so fixed on the impropriety of the way she was acting and the way, the times and the flow of traffic through her house and how she dealt with people, and then the assertion that she was sitting there drinking a drink when in fact it was probably water. We had to get around the fact that she acted inappropriately.
Her defense also concentrated on Bill Mowbray's behavior. His business was in trouble. He was being investigated for alleged tax irregularities. 10 years earlier, he had actually attempted suicide. And he told friends he would kill himself before spending one day in jail. He even told a coworker what funeral home he wanted to handle his body.
The IRS was about to close in on him, and he had no place to turn. And because of whatever it was about his personality and the way it evolved, the only way out for him was to kill himself.
After 2 weeks, Susie Mowbray's second trial was nearing the end. As the prosecutor made his closing argument, the courtroom sat riveted. And then there was a shocking development.
Smoking her cigarette, when she's standing outside with her drink in her hand, when she's medicating herself, he is still alive, gaggling in his own blood.
Your time is up, Counselor. Thank you. Remove her, please.
She makes this outburst, which is totally unexpected, although some think it was choreographed, but it's totally unexpected. She makes this outcry, and really what it does for us is gives us a relief that, look, we've done everything we can. We have got her to the edge, and now if something goes bad, I'm just going to look back and say it was Susie's fault.
The outburst was as close as Susie Mowbray would come to testifying in her own defense. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with its verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Frida S. Mowbray, also known as Susie Mowbray, not guilty. Signed, Edward.
In a highly unusual move, the jury foreman read a prepared statement shortly after the verdict.
Furthermore, members of this jury have reached the conclusion that the only issue decided by this jury is that the prosecution was unable to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the guilt of the defendant.
Jury members later said they couldn't speak to Susie's guilt or innocence, only that the prosecution had not proved its case. Despite, or perhaps because of that decision, the case continues to generate controversy.
I can't be absolutely sure in a mathematical sense that she is the one who did it, but I am sure that he did not shoot himself.
There was a physical impossibility for her to have killed her husband.
Susie Mowbray did not receive the insurance money. She is considering writing a book.
I want my children to be proud of me. I've been given a new lease on life, so to speak. And I want it to be good. I want it to matter. I still don't know exactly what it'll be, but it's going to be okay.
An elderly woman was found dead in her hotel room. Was it a natural death, or was it murder? An alert doctor noticed a horrible infection on the finger of a hotel worker who had come to the emergency room for treatment of his injury. The virulence of that infection was a clue to the mystery. Cincinnati, the third largest city in Ohio. It was named after the Roman statesman Lucius Cincinnatus, whom legend held to be the model of virtue. But in September of 1994, Rhoda Nathan, a 67-year-old grandmother visiting Cincinnati, saw a different side of the city.
She was such an up person that you could not avoid having a good time with her. She was just a terrific lady.
She checked into this hotel in the Cincinnati suburb of Blue Ash.
It's a pretty nice hotel. It does a pretty good convention business, and nothing like this had ever happened there before.
Rhoda was sharing room 237 with her best friend of 50 years, Elaine Shube, and Elaine's boyfriend, Joe Kaplan, both visiting from Florida. They were all there to attend Elaine's grandson's bar mitzvah. On Saturday morning, Joe and Elaine woke early and left the room for breakfast at 7:30. Joe said he pulled the door shut, making sure it was locked. Rhoda stayed behind so she could shower and dress with some privacy. After breakfast, a half hour later, Elaine and Joe returned to the room.
I opened the door and I was just shocked. I saw Rhoda's body. She was completely nude. The head was on the side. Golly, it looked a little purple to me.
Rhoda was barely recognizable.
I thought it was someone who wasn't a Caucasian. Her face was very brown. Well, to me, it looked like it was blood spattered inside or blood vessels burst. I don't know what, but I just didn't think it was Rhoda.
I need help! 2 hotel guests, a cardiologist and a registered nurse, answered the couple's cries for help and immediately performed CPR, believing Rhoda had suffered a heart attack and fallen. Rhoda was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. She was pronounced dead on arrival. Later that day, Elaine discovered $500 in cash missing from the purse she had left in the room while at breakfast. It was then Elaine also realized that Rhoda's necklace was missing from her neck.
I remember looking at her and saying, oh my God. I saw her breasts and I just knew this. I didn't think in my mind, oh, where's her necklace? But I know it wasn't there.
Police closed room 237 as a crime scene.
This was one of the most heinous crimes that I have ever seen in my 25-plus years in law enforcement.
Bruises on Rhoda's face and chest indicated she had been beaten with at least 2 different objects in addition to someone's fists.
She died of a severe beating. She was just beaten to death. That's the simplest way to put it.
The autopsy confirmed what police already suspected. Rhoda's death was a homicide.
I think it's a horrible thing for this community to have out-of-town visitors come in here and be brutalized in the nature that she was. And hopefully we can bring some justice to this situation. And we think the death penalty is the appropriate piece of justice.
A 67-year-old grandmother, Rhoda Nathan, was murdered in her hotel room just hours before she was to attend a bar mitzvah. Since there were no signs of forced entry, Rhoda may have known the killer and willingly opened the door. But since she was found naked and still wet from her shower, this theory was abandoned. A large blood stain was on the window curtain, and a bloody footprint was found on the bathroom floor.
It was dreadful. It was like losing a member of the family. She did nothing wrong. She was going for a good time, and she was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
The motive appeared to be robbery. Rhoda's gold and diamond necklace was missing, along with $500 in cash from Elaine's purse. The door to room 237 faced the hotel lobby atrium, but no one was seen entering the room.
We knew that whoever did this had to be at the hotel that morning between 7:30 and 8, so it really limited the suspect pool, and that was a big circumstance.
Investigators questioned hotel guests and employees, since they would have access to room keys. The death of Rhoda Nathan wasn't the only incident at the hotel that day. 42-year-old Elwood Butch Jones, a hotel handyman, had sliced his left hand on the end of a trash dumpster.
He had checked into work maybe around 6 o'clock that morning, and a couple people had seen him. Didn't seem like he had any physical problems, yet around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, people noticed that he had his left hand wrapped.
3 days later, Jones went to the hospital emergency room for treatment of his left index finger, which had become severely infected. Jones was seen by hand surgeon Dr. John McDonough.
It was pretty benign as far as the cut. It was a small cut, already partially healed. And I initially took him at his word that he had indeed cut it on a dumpster at work.
When Dr. McDonough cut into Jones's finger, infected tissue squirted 10 inches across the operating room table. The cut was deep, penetrating the capsule or sterile lining of Jones's finger joint. Jones underwent 2 different operations, antibiotic therapy, and a 5-day hospital stay. Doctors believe that Jones could have died had he not sought treatment, and Dr. McDonough suspected that his hand injury was not caused by a cut from a metal object. Lab tests revealed that the cause of the infection was a virulent bacteria called Eikenella corrodens. Eikenella is found typically in the human mouth under dental plaque around the gum line.
To get the Eikenella to propagate, you have to break the dental plaque. There has to be a significant injury, and that happens when you break a tooth usually, or a hard object comes in contact with it, such as a fist or a hand bone. So just putting his hand in his mouth would not have given him Eikenella.
Coincidentally, 2 of Rhoda Nathan's teeth had been knocked out during the attack. One tooth was found on the floor next to her body, the other in her stomach. Also suspicious, Elwood Jones told doctors that he cut his hand on the trash dumpster, but later he told co-workers he cut it on some metal stairs.
So it was obvious that he was concerned about how he had done this injury to his hand. Even though Elwood was intelligent, he was too dumb to keep his story straight.
If you did not kill Rhoda Nathan, then who do you suppose did?
I'm not guilty. That's all I can
Who do you suppose set you up?
It's one of the most brutal murder cases that I've ever heard of. Just the sheer viciousness of the beating and the sheer senselessness of it just amazed me.
The first lead in Rhoda Nathan's murder came when a handyman, Elwood Jones, who worked in the same hotel, suffered a serious hand injury on the same day of the murder. At first, police weren't overly suspicious until they learned that Jones had given co-workers one explanation of the accident, but told hospital employees another. This prompted investigators to interview Jones' surgeon, Dr. McDonough.
Well, they wanted me to give them some information about Mr. Jones, and I told them I was sorry that Mr. Jones and I had a doctor-patient relationship, and there was an ethical problem with me even talking to them about him in any way.
The Ohio Supreme Court had already ruled that the patient-physician privilege of confidentiality is negated when police have reasonable cause to believe that an injury resulted from violence related to a crime.
Several days later, they came back with court orders and information that as a physician under the laws of the state of Ohio, I was required to give testimony about a case of this nature.
Dr. McDonough said at first he took Jones's word that he had cut his hand on a dumpster. But after looking at the wound more closely, Dr. McDonough knew that Jones was lying. He recognized the wound as a human bite injury, which hand specialists call a fight bite. It happens when a clenched fist comes into contact with teeth.
Well, our definition of a fight bite is an injury to the hand, usually over any one of the knuckles, when someone strikes someone in the mouth during an argument. What happens is the skin is penetrated by the edge of the tooth, or the tooth may actually break off, and that sharp edge will then inoculate bacteria underneath the skin into the soft tissues of the hand. I've been doing hand surgery for about 25 years now, and I've only seen it 3 times. And every time I saw it, it was involved in a human bite injury involved in a fight.
The location of the cut on Jones's knuckle pointed to this conclusion, as did the lab tests, which found the human mouth bacteria Eikenella corrodens.
Hitting somebody in the mouth and cutting your hand is pretty akin to cutting your hand on the bottom of a sewer.
Dr. McDonough found Jones' injury to be so unusual, he took these photographs to show his medical students. Those photographs became a critical piece of evidence.
It was truly a case of serendipity because at that point in time we did not know the circumstances of Mr. Jones's injury, and what we thought was going to be a nice demonstration for a lecture turned out to be quite a bit more than that.
Further investigation into Jones's whereabouts on the day of Rhoda's murder revealed he had signed out a master passkey that morning and never returned it. Elwood Jones also had a prior criminal history, 3 convictions for burglary and theft. With a search warrant, investigators searched both Jones's home and that of his girlfriend and co-worker, Earlene Metcalf. Investigators examined Elwood Jones's clothes and shoes. The shoes did not match the bloody footprint found at the crime scene, and tests on his clothes found no trace of Rhoda Nathan's blood. In Jones's automobile was a toolkit and a master passkey from the hotel, 2 sets of door chains, along with a gold and diamond pendant similar to the one Rhoda Nathan was seen wearing before her death. Investigators suspected that the marks on Rhoda's face may have been made by a door chain like the one found in Jones's trunk. And the mark on her chest might have been caused by a walkie-talkie radio similar to the one Jones used at the hotel. But the autopsy photographs were not taken exactly parallel to the victim's body, creating a slight angular distortion. An accurate photographic comparison of the wounds to these items would be impossible.
It wasn't quick, it wasn't painless. I'm sure she lay on the floor for quite a while, hoping her friends would come back, and she didn't die right away.
The brutal murder of Rhoda Nathan was a terrible shock to her son and to all who knew and loved her.
She was vibrant, she was up, she was an optimist. She had a great sense of humor. She was most proud about her kids, which is, I guess, what most of us try to be proud of. She had 2 lovely sons, and they've done very nicely. Nice family, nice grandchildren, nice people.
Before going on trial, investigators wanted to know if any of the items in Jones's toolbox had been used in the assault. But investigators had a problem. Distortions in the autopsy photos made it difficult to analyze the patterns of Rhoda's injuries. But police learned that the FBI had recently developed a new technology to correct perspective distortions in photographs called photo rectification. The machine's adjustable table is first positioned to mirror the camera angle at the time the original photo was taken. The table is then moved to transform the plane on the photograph to a flat surface plane as viewed from directly overhead.
So this machine had the ability to actually rectify or to correct the imperfection in the way the photograph was taken.
Next, investigators took the rectified photos to the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. The pathologists there are experts in the study of injuries caused by weapons. The color of the autopsy photographs were altered, along with the brightness and contrast, to distinguish the injuries from marks caused by internal bleeding. It was then that marks on Rhoda's face matched the door chain in Jones's toolkit. Experts could not exclude Jones's walkie-talkie as the cause of Rhoda's chest bruise, although it did not correspond exactly.
They did not have DNA, they did not have blood evidence or hair samples or fibers, but they did have this rather unusual technique of showing how the radio may have matched up to the bruising.
Prosecutors believe that when Elaine and Joe left their hotel room for breakfast, Jones was watching and thought the room was empty. He took his toolkit and a door chain so he could say he was doing some room maintenance in case the couple came back early. Jones used the master passkey he signed out earlier that morning. Inside, he took the $500 in cash from the pocketbook. Then, Rhoda Nathan emerged from the bathroom, still wet from her shower. He struck Mrs. Nathan in the face with the door chain in his hand and struck her on the chest with his walkie-talkie. He also struck Rhoda in the mouth with his fist, removing 2 teeth and picking up the virulent bacteria which caused the infection. Before leaving, Jones took the diamond necklace from Rhoda's neck and left.
She may have even been alive and conscious when the one thing that meant the most of her that she never took off was snatched off her neck. That's the kind of guy Elwood Jones is. You know, to him it was a little trinket. To her it was the main connection to her family, to her husband, to her whole background.
The necklace found in Jones's toolbox was positively identified as belonging to Rhoda Nathan.
Unbeknownst to Elwood Jones, this was a one-of-a-kind piece of jewelry. In fact, the victim in this case, her husband, had it specially made for her from his own mother's wedding ring. There was 5 small diamonds that were made in a very unique pendant. And it was so special to her that even if she was taking a shower, even if she was swimming, even if she was sleeping, this pendant never, ever left her neck.
Dr. McDonough testified that Jones's hand injury and the Eikenella corrodens bacteria were the result of Jones' fist coming into contact with human teeth and not on a metal dumpster, as Jones claimed.
There was a lot of argument about how that bite could have, or how that injury could have been infected, but the doctor was very compelling in court when he said there is no other way it could have been infected other than from a human mouth, and that proved very compelling to the jury, I'm sure.
But of all the hospitals in the city and of all the doctors, the one guy that Elwood Jones ended up just by circumstance being assigned to that night was Dr. McDonough. And that's, again, I can't say I feel sorry for Elwood, but I'm convinced had he gone to any other doctor, this case wouldn't have been solved.
The enhanced photographs of Rhoda's injuries suggested Elwood Jones' walkie-talkie and the door chain from his toolbox were the most likely items used in the attack.
I'm still not guilty.
Elwood Jones said he was framed by police, whom he claimed had planted Rhoda's necklace in his toolbox.
His contention was that he did nothing wrong, and he was just doing his job that day, and they picked him out simply because he had a record.
The jury deliberated just 10 hours. Elwood Jones was found guilty of aggravated murder, aggravated burglary, and aggravated robbery.
Again, and I said I was innocent. And I'm still innocent, Your Honor. I did not commit this crime.
Elwood's an asshole. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that or not, but, you know, I've tried serial killers that don't bother me as much as Elwood Jones. He was just an arrogant, he was nasty to his attorney. He's just a nasty individual.
Based upon that review, the court finds itself in complete, absolute agreement with the recommendation of the jury.
Elwood Jones was sentenced to death. Outside the courtroom, Elwood Jones's sister reacted angrily to the sentence.
What happened in the court today, it is crazy. The Blue Ash Police Department framed my brother. The prosecutor, the judge, and everybody needs to be looked at in this case.
This case was interesting for a lot of reasons, and not just because it happened in a place where you normally don't have this kind of violence. That made it more shocking, maybe, but the most interesting things about this case were some of the scientific evidence that came into play, some of the forensic evidence that they found. It was not the kind of evidence you see in a lot of cases.
I'd like to tell him to start making peace with his maker, because I think in the very near future, he's going to meet his maker and he's going to pay for the vicious murder that he committed.
I'd like to pull the switch. What would I say to him? I'd say I hope he dies slowly and painfully.
This is the story of two brothers who were at one time the undisputed kings of pornography in America. Their empire crumbled in 1991 when one of the brothers was murdered, some say in cold blood. The Mitchell brothers had their share of enemies, but it took crime scene reconstruction to point to the killer. San Francisco, California, the city by the bay. Cable cars, the Golden Gate Bridge, and Alcatraz Prison, all sights of the landscape. But there's another side to this city, one born during the gold rush days when it was a busy seaport.
Showgirls, exotic blushes,
Sexual commerce, a tradition that has lived on today because of the city's well-known tolerance for sexual expression. It was here where two brothers, Artie and Jim Mitchell, broke into the adult sex business, first as filmmakers, making the 10-minute X-rated films customers watch with a handful of quarters. Eventually, the brothers expanded into the theater business. At their peak, the brothers owned 11 adult movie theaters across California. The crown jewel of their operation was the O'Farrell Theater in San Francisco. Here, the brothers went beyond movies and offered live sex shows and a nude cabaret act. The performances went far beyond anything else that was offered in the city and was another financial success. Author David Macomber, in his book, X-Rated, says that if Jim Mitchell was the brains of the operation, Artie was its genitals. Many future stars got their start at the O'Farrell Theater, including Nina Hartley and Marilyn Chambers. Chambers went on to star in the Mitchell brothers' first X-rated feature-length film, Behind the Green Door. It was an instant hit, grossing over $35 million.
For those people who haven't seen Behind the Green Door, it is a story about a woman who is abducted, taken against her will, and at one point she gets into it because she's loved as she's never been loved before by 6 women, a black man, 6 guys on trapeze, just really bizarre things.
By all accounts, Artie was the wilder of the two, earning the nicknames Merry Prankster and Party Artie. Jim played the part of the responsible older brother.
Art was way more flamboyant than Jim. Jim was kind of the introvert, and Art was the extrovert. And although they weren't the same age, you would never know it. They were like twins, like the good twin and the bad twin.
Not surprisingly, Artie also had problems in his personal life. By the time he was in his 40s, he'd been through 2 divorces, 6 kids, numerous child support and custody battles, and developed an almost unquenchable appetite for drugs, alcohol, and sadomasochistic sex.
I was thinking that we could go snorkeling.
On February 21st, 1991, Artie faced another problem.
Thinking I don't have all the clothes I can buy. Just to go down, I'll have to have
Just after 10 p.m., as Artie and his girlfriend Julie were going to bed, an intruder broke through the front door of his home and opened fire.
Check.
Emergency. I'm in the bedroom.
Julie ran to the closet and called police.
Outside the door. You hear shots? Artie. Somebody's shooting! Oh my God! Oh my God! Somebody's shooting!
By the time paramedics arrived, 45-year-old Artie Mitchell was dead on the bathroom floor with a fatal bullet wound to his head. When police arrived at the home of pornographer Artie Mitchell, they saw a middle-aged man walking away from the murder scene with a limp, carrying an umbrella.
What was making him walk stiff-legged was a rifle butt sticking out of his pant leg. I drew my service revolver, and I also ordered him to stop.
Instead, he started walking faster. Then he stopped and attempted to pull out his rifle.
Arms out to the side, palms up, do it now!
The man surrendered and told police he was also carrying a handgun. It was Jim Mitchell, the victim's brother. As he sat in the back of a patrol car, he made an interesting statement to police.
He said something to the effect that, I know I'm in trouble, I want a lawyer.
I was shocked. Just what can I say? I was totally shocked. I mean, it was just so out of context for what you consider the Mitchell brothers to be, you know, what their future was going to be like. That certainly did not include it.
In the days leading up to the shooting, Jim said that Artie's behavior had spiraled completely out of control. Artie had threatened the lives of his ex-wife as well as Jim's girlfriend, and also made a threatening phone call to their mother. Artie's ex-wife, Karen, confirmed that Artie had resisted any plan to get help.
Artie was acting very violent. He didn't want to check into the hospital, and he had told us that he'd rather die than check into the hospital.
Jim said he went to Artie's home to force him into a drug and alcohol rehabilitation program, something Artie had strenuously resisted for months. Jim said he took a gun for his own defense, and said that when Artie came out of the bedroom, he was holding what looked like a gun. He fired 7 shots. 3 hit Artie, 4 missed their mark. Ballistic tests revealed that all of the shots fired were from Jim's rifle.
It's not a question of whether or not the person did it. It's a question of his level of culpability and what was his mental state, what was in his mind.
Artie had a blood alcohol level of 0.25, almost 3 times the legal limit.
If Art was not killed this way, Art would have died in his car and taken a lot of other people with him, or overdosed on something. It was inevitable that Art was not going to be around in this world for very long, I thought.
Defense attorneys said that what happened between the 2 brothers wasn't a murder at all.
This is not a murder case. It never has been a murder case. It's a tragic accident, an accident of biblical proportions.
Homicide investigators weren't persuaded by Jim's version of the shooting. The bullet holes at the crime scene were grouped closely together, a possible indication that Jim had taken aim at his brother. But investigators needed to know the sequence of the shots and the timing of what took place. For that, all they had was the 911 call to police.
911 emergency. What's the problem?
But were any of the gunshots captured on the audio tape? To find out, investigators hired a forensic acoustician, Dr. Harry Haleen, to analyze the sound waves on the tape.
Hey, hold on, I have a couple units in red. Hold on. Artie. Oh, no! Somebody's shooting! Oh my God! Somebody's shooting! What's going on?
Dr. Haleen heard some popping and static sounds, but further tests were needed to see if they were .22 caliber gunshots.
I would have been real surprised if it wasn't a .22, but nonetheless, we had to go ahead and do some other analyses to ensure that we knew what we were talking about.
Oh my God! Hello? Hello? There's shots.
Dr. Haleen's son, Kevin, analyzed the sounds with a spectrogram, which shows a graphical representation of everything on the tape. Screams, static, and other noises can mask the sound of gunfire. But gunshots have a distinct sound wave pattern, regardless of the weapon's make or size.
It looks kind of like a funnel laying sideways, where you got the big flat face and then it tapers off to a point. And the amount of time that it takes to do that is one of the things you look at. The frequencies that it runs at that time is another thing you look at.
After analyzing the tape, Kevin Haleen identified 5 gunshots. But were they all from a .22 caliber rifle? To find out, forensic acousticians usually test fire and record the murder weapon at the crime scene for comparison. But Artie Mitchell's home was no longer available to police since it had been sold shortly after the murder.
I suddenly realized that my house was acoustically very similar.
So Dr. Haleen set up a makeshift firing range inside his own home. This glassed-in porch would double as the hallway in Artie's home. A bucket filled with wet newspapers caught the bullets. To recreate the recording made of the shooting, Dr. Haleen placed a telephone in a nearby room and recorded the shots through the open line. The murder weapon was fired and recorded over the telephone. The test firings were compared to the shots on the police audio tape. Since the test firings were done in a different home with different acoustics, there would be some differences, but there were many similarities.
When we got the results back, we began to see that we had made a match, and this was indeed the gun that was used in the incident.
Dr. Haleen believes that the 5 crackling sounds on the 911 tape were 5 of the 7 gunshots fired from the murder weapon. The first 2 shots happened before the call was made to police. Investigators' next step was to determine the time between each gunshot in order to recreate the crime exactly as it happened. Prosecutors wanted to recreate the shooting of Artie Mitchell to determine whether it was an accident or murder. Laser tests identified the direction of each of the 7 shots. Next, the blood spatter evidence and the sequence of the shots recorded on the 911 audio tape all helped to piece together the event. For example, investigators knew Artie was standing when hit in the shoulder. The bullet hole through the wall corresponded perfectly with the height of his shoulder.
This was a unique case because of the nature of the gunshots and the ricochets and the tracing of the path of the bullets and trying to place the victim in certain spots.
The crime scene reconstruction revealed that Jim broke into the home and immediately fired the first shot down the hall, through the right side of Artie's bedroom door. The second shot went through that same door just as it was opening.
Hey, what are you doing?
As Artie stepped into the hall, shot number 3 ricocheted off of the bedroom door frame, went into the bedroom, and landed on the dresser. The 4th shot hit Artie in the abdomen and came out through his back. Artie then stepped into the bathroom. The 5th shot went through the bathroom wall and into his shoulder. And for the next 28 seconds, there were no shots fired.
The significance of that, if in fact there's a gap in the gunshots, would be that someone is waiting, watching, taking aim before the next shot is fired.
Based on bullet angle trajectory, prosecutors believe Jim knelt down at this point and took aim. When Artie looked out, he was hit with the fatal shot. He was killed instantly. The 7th and final shot hit the hallway entrance. Prosecutors believe the shooting was intentional and was not an accident.
he had to aim because the evidence finally showed that that fatal shot actually occurred when the victim poked his head out the bathroom door. And he'd already been shot 2 times at that point.
The forensic analysis was invaluable in reconstructing the crime. With this information, Jim Mitchell was charged with murder. The hardest part for prosecutors would be explaining the shooting to a jury in a way they could understand. So the district attorney decided to try something never done before. He would ask the judge to allow the forensic animation into evidence.
I knew we were going to have a big fight on our hands because I think in, what, a 27-second video, I think it was, if that, it basically summarized the whole case from the prosecution perspective. And obviously, they wouldn't want it in because I felt it was a very powerful piece of evidence. The actual video or animation was really nothing more than a moving diagram.
By today's standards, the animation looks crude, but at the time, it was state-of-the-art.
It was done with a rather flat-shaded algorithm for rendering. It was fairly unsophisticated. The human models were fairly disjointed. It was effective, showing placement of situations, where people were, how angles of trajectory were, and things like that, but it wasn't terribly pretty.
Jim Mitchell's defense attorney argued that the animation was inaccurate since it included subjective elements that no one would possibly know. The defense also challenged Dr. Halene's acoustic tests, arguing his conclusions were based on gunshot sound tests that were not conducted at the crime scene. Judge Richard Briner ultimately allowed the animation into evidence. It was the first time forensic animation was used in a murder case. As the trial against Jim Mitchell drew near, the prosecution struggled to understand the motive. Why did Jim Mitchell kill his brother? As self-proclaimed artists, protectors of free speech and cultural icons, the brothers were wealthy thanks to their multi-million-dollar pornography and strip club empire. And the brothers had always been close, even since childhood. Family members admitted that Artie's behavior had been a problem for some time. On the day of his death, Artie called his mother, and even she admitted that Artie was, in her words, out of control. Jim's girlfriend, Lisa Adams, told police that Artie called her numerous times in the days before his death, and the calls were threatening in nature.
The victim, argued, was a very, very severe alcoholic, which had weighed on his brother. That injected into this case the whole issue of a heat of passion. And if a killing is done in a heat of passion, even though you intend to kill, that will reduce it to a voluntary manslaughter.
Prosecutors believe that Jim was no longer able to cope with his brother's behavior and irresponsibility. On the night of the murder, Jim didn't knock on Artie's door, he kicked it in. During the commotion, Artie's girlfriend grabbed the telephone, hid in the closet, and called police. Dispatcher Sherry Tucker took the call.
911 emergency. I'm in the bedroom and we hear noises like gun noises outside the door. Do you hear shots? Do you know who it is? Artie. Somebody's shooting!
Artie had gone out to find out who was out there.
Artie. Oh my God, hello? Artie, hello? There's shots.
She was yelling at him while she was on the phone with me, and we were getting no response.
After the first 2 shots, Artie left the bedroom and headed down the hallway. The third shot hit the door frame. Shots 4 and 5 both hit Artie. In the abdomen, then the shoulder. Had the shooting stopped here, medical experts believe Artie would have survived. For 28 seconds on the 911 tape, no shots were fired. But when Artie looked out, he was hit with the fatal shot. The entire episode took less than a minute. The defense argued that the beer bottle found near Artie's body played a significant role in the case.
The defense argued that either the bottle appeared to be a gun, and in one instance, I believe the defense even suggested that Artie Mitchell at one point in time had a gun when he came down the hallway.
But no gun was found near Artie's body, only the beer bottle. In the end, the jury found Jim Mitchell guilty of voluntary manslaughter.
The manslaughter is something that, if it stands up on appeal, is something that he can accept.
I mean, it started out with the defense claiming it was an accident. Obviously, the jury concluded it was not an accident.
Mitchell was sentenced to 6 years in prison. After serving 3 years, he was released for good behavior. Police officers who worked on the case say the sentence was not nearly harsh enough.
For taking a life, I think that was a very, very mellow sentence.
He got away with murder, and now he's back in business.
Yet, without the crime scene reconstruction and animation, there may not have been a conviction for manslaughter.
Without that, we couldn't have pieced it together in a way to show the actual sequence of events. And once again, coming back to that issue, what was in the mind of the perpetrator?
The once young man with mischievous eyes, Artie is buried in the town of Lodi, far from San Francisco and the eyes of curiosity seekers. Jim Mitchell continues to run the O'Farrell Theater. According to the marquee, it is still a venture of the Mitchell brothers, but only in spirit. Just 90 miles north of New York City, a female correctional officer was discovered missing from her post at the prison. There was no trace of her anywhere inside the prison. None of the inmates or guards knew where she went or reported seeing anything suspicious. How could a guard simply disappear in an overcrowded maximum security prison? Greenhaven State Correctional Facility, one of the toughest maximum security prisons in the United States. A violent, overcrowded space that is home to 1,800 of New York State's most violent criminals.
Greenhaven was, I think at that time, had to be considered our supermax prison in the state. And everybody in there had long time. Everybody in there was a vicious criminal. There were no newcomers. It was a pretty bad place as far as the population was concerned.
More than 500 prisoners inside Greenhaven were convicted murderers. 1981 was the first year female correctional officers worked in this all-male maximum security prison. There were 50 on staff, all new to the job. One of them was 31-year-old Donna Payant.
If I want to describe Donna and her personality, I would describe her as a very strong-willed, independent, determined person, and with a strong sense of justice.
Donna had 3 children. Her husband was also a corrections officer but worked at another prison. Although her family came to accept her job choice, some of the men working inside the prison establishment did not. While at the training academy, an instructor entered Donna's room at night uninvited. Donna responded by filing a sexual harassment lawsuit, but later thought better of it and dropped the suit. On May 15, 1981, Donna punched in just after noon for the 1 to 9 shift. About an hour later, Donna was with 2 other officers when the phone rang. It was a call for Donna.
Hello? Donna Payant received a telephone call in the early afternoon of that Friday. And it was a strange call, and in the opinion of her co-officers who were working with her, her reaction after receiving the call was somewhat alarming.
The other officers didn't know who placed the call, but they said that Donna turned away from them to keep her conversation private. When she hung up, she left, not saying where she was going.
Donna Payant was upset. Not upset in a sense that she was nervous, but she was angered. Her words were, "I'm putting an end to this. It's going to end right here and now," or something to that effect. And then she storms off.
5 hours later, at the regular evening roll call for officers, Donna Payant was absent. Prison officials immediately ordered an emergency lockdown. All prisoners were confined to their cells. Officers combed the prison, going through all the cell blocks, offices, and recreation areas, but there was no trace of Donna Payant.
That's a maximum security prison, so they had pretty good control of who left and entered there. And there was no indication that she left.
As dawn broke the next day, prison officials received some terrible news. In a nearby landfill, where all of the prison trash was taken each day, workers found the badly mutilated body of a blonde woman in a prison guard uniform. The body had been wrapped in a garbage bag. The day after Donna Payant disappeared, her family was called to Green Haven Prison.
There were officials there, and they met us, and I knew then. They didn't say so, but I knew something was wrong. So when we walked in, then they told us, you know, she was dead, and that they had found her, you know, in a nearby dump.
The body in the landfill was positively identified as Donna Payant. She became the first female corrections officer to die in the line of duty in U.S. history. She was found with ligatures around her wrists and neck. The cause of death was strangulation. There were also signs that she had been sexually assaulted.
My father was very, very upset, and he never got over it.
The body had gone through the trash compactor of a garbage truck. This told investigators that the body had been placed in a prison garbage can, where it was emptied into the trash truck that serviced the prison. And at the landfill, the body had been run over by a bulldozer, which levels the garbage into a flat surface. Every bone in her body had been broken.
She was covered with all sorts of debris and garbage, filth, and wetness, because it was a very, very wet dump. And any evidence that would have been available had to have been contaminated by all of this extraneous materials that covered her body.
If Donna Payant's body had left Green Haven along with the prison's trash, the killer had to be someone inside the prison, with more access than prisoners customarily have. But who inside the prison would want her dead?
Were any inmates harassing her? Was she a disciplinarian who came down hard on any inmates? Was there any reason why an inmate would want to attack her?
In addition to access, an inmate would have needed privacy to commit the murder. Since prison guards would have this kind of freedom of movement, they became the focus of the investigation. Just 3 days before her death, witnesses saw a male guard involved in a heated physical confrontation with Donna Payant.
He was seen, as she turned away from that heated discussion, he was seen poking her on her shoulder, on her back. He was very upset.
And it was soon discovered that this guard was among many at Green Haven who had something to hide.
People had motives to kill Donna inside prison. I believe that because of all the illegal activities that were going on in Green Haven at the time of her death and long before that, that there were people there that not only did they have the motive, they had the capability to carry out such a crime.
Those activities had been revealed in an official report released just 2 weeks before Donna Payant's murder. The Green Haven guards were suspected of having a let's make a deal attitude with the prisoners. Guards were selling drugs and even providing prostitutes to inmates. A good old boy network had kept this secret for years, but some of the new female recruits like Donna Payant wanted no part of that network. And when Donna Payant had made the earlier charge of sexual harassment, she quickly became known as a whistleblower.
She was already marked as a person that would say something if something was wrong or if there were illegal activities going on, that she was marked as a person that would go as far up as possible and report it.
During an autopsy on Donna Payant, the medical examiner discovered she was not only sexually assaulted with extreme savagery, he also found what appeared to be bite marks. One, a crescent-shaped wound on her chest, was particularly clear.
A couple of the teeth marks obviously had sunk in much deeper than others, and you could tell that it was the teeth, as I remember, were not perhaps the best teeth in the world. They weren't perfectly shaped, it seemed to me.
The bite mark, ligature marks, strangulation, and the brutality of the sexual assault all indicated that this killer had murdered before. It was not his first crime. But who had this kind of homicidal history? And who at Green Haven was so angry with Donna Payant that they would not only want her dead, but would kill her in such a brutal way?
The day after her death, Donna Payant's body was found here in the Amenia dump about 30 miles from the prison.
News of Donna Payant's murder soon made its way throughout the state of New York. The bite mark impression on Donna Payant's body was photographed and sent to forensic odontologist Dr. Lowell Levine. When Dr. Levine studied the impression, he was immediately convinced of two things. First, he was certain the mark was a bite impression. Second, Dr. Levine knew he had seen this same bite impression before.
I said, wait a minute, I just saw this 2 or 3 days ago in a lecture that I had given on a case that I had seen 4 years ago in Schenectady, New York.
It was the case of a 30-year-old woman named Mary Lee Wilson, who had been strangled with a ligature, brutally sexually assaulted, and bitten. Dr. Levine immediately asked the logical question: was Mary Lee Wilson's killer an inmate at the prison where Donna Payant worked?
I said, wait a minute, you know, Lemuel Smith has got to be in prison and had access to this lady.
The answer was yes. 39-year-old Lemuel Smith was in Green Haven State Correctional Facility. He had confessed to the murders of Mary Lee Wilson and another woman. Both victims had been killed in the same way. Both were signature killings. But in the 4 years in prison, Lemuel Smith had been a model prisoner. He had found religion. He was an altar boy and rose to become the assistant to the Catholic chaplain. This new position granted Smith enormous freedom inside the prison, freedom most of the inmates didn't have.
So there's no way in the world that I could have killed her. The woman was beaten. The woman was supposed to have been sodomized, right? Now this is right in a busy corridor, this office right there, sodomized. Then she was tied up. Then she was put in garbage bags, right? And then she was supposed to be put in a garbage can, right? Now, I know you've never tried to lift a dead body, but it's twice as much as human weight, right? It's live weight. It's impossible. It can't be done.
But prison officials found evidence that Smith had some prior contact with Donna Payant and that the two developed a friendship.
Yes, I definitely knew Donna Payant. She was working my block. That's it.
Donna Payant had made some contact with Lemuel Smith concerning an item, I believe it was a jewelry box, that she was looking to have made. Lemuel Smith, while in prison, was doing some wood carvings on occasion.
In Lemuel Smith's prison file, investigators found a report from Dr. Svi Klopat, a psychiatrist who evaluated Smith 4 years earlier.
After I interviewed him, he said to me, listen, one thing I want you to do is I want you to make sure that I never get out, because I'm going to do this again, because I can't stop it.
I never confessed to nothing. I made a statement while I was drugged up, right? That was supposed to be for the psychiatrist.
Dr. Klopat diagnosed Lemuel as a paranoid schizophrenic with a borderline personality. He warned officials that without psychiatric care, Smith was sure to kill again. That warning was ignored when Smith was granted extra freedoms by virtue of his pastoral duties.
So he had the entire, several offices to himself with the telephones in that office, and he was the only person who really could use the office.
When investigators searched the chaplain's office, it seemed to be in perfect order. A closer examination revealed the room had just been cleaned.
The floor had been washed down with not so clean water, but it was pretty obviously that had been done recently.
In an office closet, investigators found several blonde hairs. Those were found to be microscopically consistent with Donna Payant's hair. The only other evidence was the bite impression found on Donna's chest during the autopsy. Because of the damage to Donna's body by the garbage compactor and the bulldozer, some believed it wasn't a bite wound at all, and as evidence, it was essentially worthless. Somewhere within the walls of Greenhaven State Correctional Facility lurked the killer of prison guard Donna Payant. A number of inmates told officials that the male prison guard who was seen fighting with Donna 3 days before her death was the one responsible. When the guard was questioned about Donna's murder, he admitted he was selling cocaine to prisoners, but he also said he had nothing to do with Donna's murder. The other suspect was a prisoner named Lemuel Smith, whose prior killings closely resembled Donna Payant's murder. Whoever killed Donna had bitten her, leaving a highly distinctive bite impression on her chest. The bite wound was produced by someone's bottom teeth, by someone who was missing one of his 4 bottom incisors. Lemuel Smith was missing a bottom incisor. This space can be measured, as can the spaces between the other teeth. The picture on top is a bite mark found on Marilee Wilson's body, the woman Smith admitted killing. In the middle is Lemuel Smith's bite pattern, imprinted on wax. And on the bottom is the bite mark found on Donna Payant's body. When compared, the space between the lower right incisors is clearly visible. In all 3 cases, the measurements and angles of the teeth are exactly the same. But if Lemuel Smith killed Donna Payant, how did he do it, and why?
was following exactly the same pattern as the previous murders. He had involved himself with her. He believed, apparently, that she was someone who was interested in him. He saw her as a close friend or someone who really cared about him. He made her a gift, so it follows the exact same pattern as before.
The key, say psychiatrists, was the jewelry box Lemuel Smith had made as a gift for Donna Payant.
Yeah, hello?
Police theorize that the phone call she received just before her death was from Lemuel Smith calling from the privacy of the chaplain's office.
You know, I made something for you. I want you to...
A personal call from an inmate would have been an embarrassment for a rookie guard like Donna Payant.
I can't talk to you.
Other guards said Donna seemed upset after the call and left abruptly. Once in the chaplain's office, the two may have argued, or Donna may have rejected him or his gift. This set off the same homicidal fury that had left two other women dead. Then, he sexually assaulted her, strangled her, and at some point, bit her. The chaplain was away that day, and Smith would have had enough privacy to commit murder, wrap the body in trash bags, and then clean the room. The cleanup was well done, except for hairs that were inadvertently swept into the closet. Smith also had enough prison access to get the body to the trash dumpster without being noticed. In January of 1983, Lemuel Smith was convicted of Donna Payant's murder and now spends 23 hours a day in solitary confinement. Lemuel Smith continues to deny he was involved, insisting he was framed by prison guards.
I'm not politically correct. I'm a criminal, right? I got a bad record, right? Nobody wants to say anything good about me, right? Because that's going against the system. And Lola Bean, these experts, my opinion. Your opinion is only as honest as a person. It's only as honest as the evidence that you use to come to this opinion, right? And this was a dishonest case. I want to split the face.
As for the bite mark, he claims it was an injury caused by the trash compactor and bulldozer at the landfill, and that those involved in the alleged cover-up doctored it to make it look like his bite pattern.
You can see that there's a match. You're just saying that the match is fabricated.
I can see it. Anybody can see it. But it's not a bite mark. Here's a body. Been put in a compactor, crushed. All they say. But the only thing clear and distinct on it is the bite mark. Come on, it has to be distorted. Unless it came afterwards.
That claim is backed up by Donna Payant's sister. She, too, is convinced that prison guards murdered her sister, then covered it up.
I still do not believe that an inmate would, pick out a CO to kill in a maximum security prison, in the middle of the prison, in the middle of the day. I don't believe that, and it's not possible. It hasn't happened before. It hasn't happened since.
I didn't do it. I hope she finds peace of mind. I hope she gets justice for her sister. That's what I want.
For investigators, however, there is no question. Lemuel Smith had the means and the opportunity to kill Donna Payant, a fact they say is backed up by the bite mark on her body.
He committed the same crime 3 different times on 3 different women, and he had to know in his own mind, I did it again. And that's what caught him.
A memorial headstone now sits in front of Greenhaven Prison, a reminder of Donna Payant's brutal murder, a murder experts say could and should have been prevented.